The train whistle tore through the thick Savannah night, wailing like the cry of a lost soul. Elena Vance stepped onto the platform, her high heels hitting the cold stone with a sharp, dry click that was immediately swallowed by the rain drumming against the tin roof. She gripped her frayed leather handbag, the last relic of her high-flying life in Chicago. Inside were 5 crisp $10 bills, a phone on its last legs, and a copy of her disbarment papers. Savannah welcomed her with the brine of sea salt and the cloying scent of magnolias, a strange mix of life and decay. Elena stood under the station's jaundiced yellow light, her breath hitching into a faint mist. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling as she scrolled to the last text from her old friend Sarah. "I'll wait for you at the farewell square, right by the Oglethorpe statue. Don't sweat it, Savannah is where people like us go to fall off the map." But Sarah wasn't there. Elena hiked through the cobblestone streets, where ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss looked like ghostly hands reaching for passers-by. The square was dead quiet, nothing but the rain hitting the leaves and the gurgle of water in the old drains. She waited 10 minutes, then 30. Sarah wasn't picking up. A bad feeling began to crawl up her spine. In the world of the hunted, silence isn't golden. It's a death knell. "You lost, little lady." The voice came from the shadows of a narrow alley. 2 men stepped out, broad-shouldered in dark coats. One held an umbrella covering half his face. The other was flicking a Zippo lighter. Elena took a step back, her litigator instincts kicking in. She didn't look them in the eye, she watched their hands. "I'm waiting for a friend. He's a cop, and he'll be here in 2 minutes." The guy with the lighter scoffed, a laugh as murky as sewer water. "In this town, the cops are busy knocking back bourbon this time of night. Hand over the bag, and maybe you'll keep enough legs to go find your friend." They closed in. Elena squared her shoulders, her heart hammering against her ribs. As the first one lunged for her bag strap, a massive shadow stepped out from behind the towering oak statue. No shout, no warning, just the sound of bone meeting meat and a pained, "Huh!" The guy reaching for the bag hit the stones hard, clutching a snapped wrist. The other pulled a switchblade, but the shadow just stood there, as still as a statue carved from the dark. A flickering streetlight caught the stranger's face, a long scar running from temple to jaw. Eyes so deep and cold the man with the knife froze in his tracks. "Julian," the guy stammered, clearly recognizing him. "You're still breathing in this god-forsaken hole." "Beat it," Julian said. His voice was low and gravelly, carrying the weight of a man used to giving orders. "Before I decide which leg of yours to snap next." The thugs bolted into the rain, leaving Elena shaking in the middle of the square. Julian didn't look at her. He bent down, picked up her bag, gave it a quick brush off, and handed it over. "Thanks," Elena said, her voice thin. How can I repay you?" Julian turned away, heading toward the row of historic houses. "Stay clear of the square after midnight. Savannah isn't kind to people carrying as many secrets as you are." Elena had no choice but to follow. She needed a place to crash, and Sarah seemed to have vanished into thin air. "Wait, I'm looking for the Willow Inn. Mrs. Martha." "Bast!" Julian stopped, his shoulders tensing. He turned back, scanning her from head to toe with a hunter's precision. "You're the new tenant from Chicago? How did you know?" "I'm the one who bolted the door to that room this morning," Julian replied curtly. "Follow me." They walked in silence through the historic district. Julian had a slight limp in his left leg, a flaw he tried to hide but couldn't keep from Elena's sharp eyes. She realized he wasn't some drifter. The way he checked the corners, the way he kept a safe perimeter around her, those were the reflexes of former law enforcement. The Willow Inn appeared at the end of the road, a colonial-style mansion with peeling cream paint, draped in deep purple wisteria. Martha, a black woman with silver hair and a smile as warm as a hearth, met them at the door. "Lord, Elena, you're soaked to the bone," Martha cried, ushering her inside and throwing a thick towel over her shoulders. "Julian, thanks for bringing her in. I was worried sick when Sarah called saying she couldn't make the pickup." Elena froze at the mention of Sarah. "Sarah called you? Did she say where she was?" Martha's face clouded over. "She just said something came up and she had to get out of Dodge for a few days. Told you to stay here. Said everything's paid up front." Elena gripped the towel. She knew Sarah. Sarah wouldn't ditch a friend like this unless she was in deep. She glanced at Julian, who stood in the shadows of the foyer, quietly shedding his damp coat. He was watching her, and for a second she saw the suspicion in his eyes meet her own fear. Your room is on the second floor, number 4, Martha said, handing her a heavy brass key. Julian will take you bags up. I can get it, Elena declined instinctively. Let him do it, Martha winked. Julian's the handyman here. He knows how to handle those creaky wooden stairs. Elena followed Julian up. The wood groaned under their feet like ancient whispers. Julian set her small bag in the attic room overlooking the oak garden. The room smelled of lavender and old wood, strangely peaceful compared to the storm outside. As Julian turned to leave, Elena called out, Julian, why did that guy know your name? And why did you help me? Julian paused at the threshold, his shadow stretching across the room. Helping those in trouble is the house rule. As for the name, people tend to remember the man who sent them up the river. He shut the door with a final, decisive click. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, feeling exhaustion hit her like a ton of bricks. She pulled the file from her bag, glancing at the photo of Mark, her ex-fiancé, now a frontrunner for governor of Illinois. He had used her as a human shield for a multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme, stripped her of her bar license, and clearly, he wasn't done with her, even though she'd run all the way down south. She stepped out onto the small balcony. Down in the backyard, under a dim security light, she saw Julian standing at a workbench. He wasn't sleeping, he was using a hand plane, meticulously shaving a beam. His movements were steady and rhythmic, a kind of meditation to drown out bad memories. Watching him work, it clicked for Elena. Savannah wasn't just a place to disappear. It was a place where broken things were brought to be refitted into something new. Julian was fixing this inn, and maybe she'd have to learn how to fix her life from the scraps of law and broken trust she had left. The rain began to taper off, leaving only the scuff of the plane against the wood. Elena went back inside and locked the door tight. She didn't know where Sarah was or what Mark's next move would be. But at least for tonight, behind the oak door Julian had closed himself, she felt safe. The following morning, Elena woke to the sound of birds chirping through the branches of ancient oaks. The Savannah sun wasn't as harsh as Chicago's. It carried a honey gold hue, thick and shimmering, spilling over the attic windowsill. She headed downstairs, the scent of fresh ground coffee and Mrs. Pun, Martha's buttermilk biscuits, guiding her toward the small kitchen at the back of the inn. Julian was already there. He wasn't sitting at the table but stood leaning against the windowsill, holding a steaming white porcelain mug. He had swapped last night's soaked clothes for a faded denim shirt, sleeves rolled high to reveal the lean muscle of a man used to blue-collar work. When Elena walked in, his eyes flicked over her for a split second, just enough to check if she was all right, before turning back to the garden. Eat up, sugar. It's a long road ahead, and you can't get a lick of work done on an empty stomach, Mrs. Burmis, Martha said warmly, sliding a plate of poached eggs and pan-seared bacon in front of Elena. Thank you, Mrs. Martha. I'm planning to look for Sarah right after this. She's not the type to just take off without a word. Julian set his coffee mug down on the stone counter with a sharp clink. Sarah didn't go far, but if I were you, I'd watch my own back first. Elena looked up, her sharp lawyer's gaze never wavering. Do you know something about her? I know this neck of the woods. And I know when someone like Sarah vanishes in the thin air, it's usually 'cause they saw something they weren't supposed to. Julian stepped past her, grabbing his tool belt off the wall. I'm headed into town to fix Mr. Aldridge's roof. I'll drop you off at Old Man Miller's law office. It's the only place in this city that dare hire a sinner from Chicago as an unpaid lackey. They walked down Bull Street. The moss-draped oaks formed a lush green canopy over the historic mansions. Elena could feel the contrast between this stillness and the undercurrents churning beneath. Old Man Miller's office sat in a worn-out red brick building where files were stacked to the ceiling, and the smell of old paper was stifling. After a brief and skeptical exchange, Miller, a man with thick glasses and a crotchety attitude, tossed a dusty stack of files at Elena. Get to it. If you find the loophole in this mess, I'll think about giving you a real seat. This is a lawsuit from the harbor residents against the Southern Cross Real Estate Group. Elena spent the entire day buried in legal clauses. However, her focus shifted when she came across a zoning map for the city's south side. Something was off. Southern Cross's name appeared constantly as the buyer, but the subsidiary companies listed as owners had registration addresses at a P.O. box in Chicago right near Mark's old office. As dusk fell, Elena left the office with a heavy heart. Passing a half-finished construction site, she spotted Julian's silhouette packing up his gear on the roof of an old warehouse. Suddenly, a glint of light reflected from a window in the building across the street caught her eye. It was the metallic shine of a gun barrel. "Julian, get down!" Elena screamed, her voice echoing through the empty street. Bang! The gunshot shattered the twilight peace. Julian collapsed onto the roof, but quickly rolled behind a decorative ledge. Elena sprinted toward the warehouse wooden stairs, her heart pounding like it wanted to burst out of her chest. She didn't think twice. The instinct to protect the man who had saved her last night took over. When she reached the roof, Julian was clutching his left bicep, dark red blood soaking through his denim shirt. His face didn't flinch from the pain, but his eyes burned with a cold fury. "Are you crazy? You should have run," Julian growled under his breath as Elena knelt beside him. "Zip it. I'm not letting you die here," she shot back, tearing a silk strip from her scarf to tie his wound tight. "He's gone. I saw a man in a dark coat heading down the fire escape on the other side." Julian looked at her, a complex expression somewhere between surprise and a quiet respect. "That's a professional-grade tourniquet job. My mother was a combat nurse. I learned a thing or two before I decided to pick up a pen instead of a needle." They slipped away from the scene before the police arrived. Julian led her through narrow alleys only a local would know. By the time they reached the Willow, Mrs. Martha had gone to bed. In the quiet kitchen under the dim yellow light, Elena made Julian sit down so she could dress the wound properly. She grabbed the first aid kit and cleaned the graze on his arm. It wasn't deep, but it sat right next to an old scar, a jagged mark, evidence of another bullet that had buried itself deep in his flesh years ago. "This scar wasn't from some two-bit street thug, was it?" Elena asked softly as she applied ointment to his arm. Julian remained silent for a long time, his breathing heavy in the stillness. "That's why I'm not a detective in Savannah anymore. 5 years ago, I stumbled onto a multi-state money laundering ring. I thought I was the hero until my partner got bought out and this bullet was his parting gift." Elena paused, looking deep into Julian's eyes. "Was the company called Southern Cross?" Julian nodded slowly. "They're buying up land, turning historic sites into casinos and malls. Anyone who gets in the way disappears. Sarah was working for one of the notary offices handling those deals. She sent me an encrypted text before she went missing. They're scaling up. A big fish from Chicago is coming." A cold shiver ran down Elena's spine. That big fish could be Mark. He's running for governor, and he needs a massive source of untraceable capital. Savannah is perfect because the land laws here have holes dating back to the colonial era. Two people, two different heartaches, now realized they were facing the same enemy. Julian looked down at Elena's small but steady hands as she finished bandaging him. He realized she wasn't just a fallen lawyer. She was an ally with a sharp head and a brave heart. "Why didn't you report the shooting today?" Elena asked as she packed up the gauze. "Because in Savannah, you never know who's holding the gun and who's holding the keys to the cell," Julian replied, his voice dropping to a warning tone. "The police chief here is thick as thieves with the Southern Cross Board. If I report it, they'll just say I shot myself or pin it on some homeless guy. Then we play it my way," Elena said, standing tall, her shadow stretching across the kitchen wall. "The law can be bent, but numbers and seals don't lie. I'll use my job at Miller's office to dig through those property records. We need to find the crack in their legal foundation." Julian stood up, testing his bandaged arm. A faint, rare smile appeared on his lips, not of joy but of accepting the challenge. "You know if we start this, there's no turning back? They won't stop at just one stray bullet. I lost my career, my reputation, and almost my life in Chicago," Elena replied, her eyes burning under the kitchen light. "I have nothing left to lose but the truth. And I believe in karma, Julian. Those who build palaces on the tears of others We'll eventually have to watch them crumble. Julian stepped closer, the distance narrowing until Elena could smell the scent of oak and the heavy tang of metal on him. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a light touch that carried the weight of an oath. Then let's make it a loud crash. But from now on, you don't go anywhere alone. Savannah is beautiful at night, but she's full of hungry ghosts. Elena nodded. She felt a strange bond forming. It wasn't typical romance, it was the trust of two soldiers standing in the same trench. As Julian left the kitchen to head to his room on the ground floor, Elena remained there, looking through the window into the pitch-black garden. Camera flashes erupted like artificial lightning, shredding Savannah's gentle night. The Regency West Hotel, a fortress of glass and steel standing stark against rows of historic red brick buildings, was hosting the Future of the South fundraising gala. Elena stood by a flower bed across the street, the simple black dress she'd borrowed from Martha seeming to drown amidst the bespoke suits and gem-encrusted evening gowns of the elite. She adjusted the tiny earpiece hidden beneath her loose hair. "Julian, I have eyes on him. Black limo Illinois plates," she whispered, her voice trembling not from the cold, but from an outburst of fury. "Steady, Elena. You aren't his lawyer anymore. You're his ghost. Don't let emotions blur the lens." Julian's voice came through, low and gravelly, over the comms. He was on the rooftop of an adjacent building, infrared binoculars, scanning every face entering the hotel. The car door opened. Mark stepped out. He was exactly the same, that phony radiant smile and hair slicked back without a single strand out of place. Walking beside him was a rotund, middle-aged man wearing a Savannah City Council badge on his lapel. They shook hands, a handshake worth millions of dollars in taxpayer money, and blatantly condemned tracts of land. "He's heading into the main lobby." "I'm going in through the employee entrance," Elena said, pacing toward the hotel's back alley, where she'd used Miller's assistant credentials to secure a temporary pass for the floral delivery crew. Inside, the air was thick with expensive perfume and champagne. Alana expertly wove through groups of guests, the tray of drinks in her hands acting as a perfect shield. She approached the VIP section where Mark stood near a large map of Savannah. On it, the old harbor district, where Sarah used to work, was marked in stark red with the words, "Southern Cross Complex Project, Phase 2. "Julian, I hear it," she murmured, tucked away behind a velvet curtain. "Mark is promising the councilman that the campaign contributions from Southern Cross will be moved through trustee accounts in Savannah before the end of the month. He called it an investment in political stability." "Son of a bitch," Julian hissed through his teeth. "He's openly buying the governor's seat with Savannah's land." "Elena, do you see the blue file on his table? That's the list of anonymous shareholders. We need that." But before Elena could act, something went wrong. A massive security guard with a radio on his shoulder approached her. He stared at the employee ID that didn't match her refined features, and the unmistakable aura of a Chicago lawyer. "Hey, you! Stop right there," he barked. Elena froze. Mark turned his head at the shout. In a moment that felt like an eternity, his eyes met hers. The smile on Mark's face vanished, replaced by sheer terror, which quickly morphed into a look of cold cruelty. "Elena," Mark uttered, his voice carrying across the quieted room. "What are you doing here? Run, Elena." "Now!" Julian's voice roared in her earpiece. Elena dropped the drinks tray, the glass shattering like a starting gun. She spun around and bolted for the emergency exit. Behind her came shouts and the thundering footsteps of security in pursuit. She burst into the parking lot, her breath coming in gasps. An old Jeep peeled up, the door already flung open. "Get in!" Julian yelled. She managed to dive in and slam the door just as a bullet shattered the side mirror. Julian floored the gas, the Jeep roaring as it sped away over the cobblestone streets. Close behind, two glossy black Southern Cross SUVs were hot on their tail, their headlights sweeping across the rearview mirror like a monster's eyes in the night. "They have guns, Julian!" Elena screamed as another round slammed into the tailgate. "Get your head down!" Julian executed a masterful turn, swerving past a garbage truck before abruptly jerking into an alley, so narrow the mirrors scraped the brick walls, sending sparks flying. The high-stakes chase unfolded through the historic district. Julian didn't head for the main avenues, where police patrolled. He knew who owned them. He lured them into the old harbor area, where abandoned warehouses formed a dark labyrinth. Why are we coming here? Elena asked, gripping her seatbelt. Because out here, tech and power don't help them. Out here, there's only darkness, and only those who know it survive, Julian answered, his face set tight in the dim glow of the dashboard. He suddenly killed the headlights, driving by feel and memory. The Jeep rocketed into an empty warehouse, and Julian slammed on the brakes, ending in a long screech followed by dead silence. He pulled Elena out of the car, taking cover behind a stack of old wooden pallets. The two SUVs roared up, stopping in front of the warehouse. Men in black suits stepped out, holding pistols equipped with silencers. Mark was there too, standing behind the protection of his henchmen. He stepped into the dark space, his voice echoing triumphantly. Elena, you can't run forever. Savannah isn't Chicago. No one will hear you scream out here. Return what you took from Miller's office, and maybe I'll let you leave the state alive. Elena started to stand up to confront him, but Julian's large hand clamped onto her shoulder, forcing her down. He signaled for silence, then slowly pulled an object from his belt. Not a gun, but a high-powered military flashlight and a metal whistle. Julian hurled the switched-on flashlight toward the far corner of the warehouse. The henchman immediately opened fire in that direction. Seizing the moment, Julian lunged out like a panther. He didn't use a gun, he used the darkness. The sounds of impact, snapping bone, and groans of pain echoed through the night. One by one, the men went down before they could even see their attacker's face. Mark backed away toward the SUV in a panic. Who's there, police? No, Mark. Julian's voice rang out from behind him, cold as ice. Just a Savannah resident who doesn't like strangers trashing his city. Julian landed a punch that sent Mark crumpling into the mud. Before Mark's remaining man could recover, actual police sirens wailed from a distance. Elena had managed to text Miller to have him call a federal patrol unit he knew. We gotta move. Julian pulled Elena along. The long while, and the long while, to be here in 3 minutes to clean up Mark's mess. We can't get caught right now. They vanished into the harbor fog just as the red and blue lights appeared at the top of the street. Back at the Willow, Elena sat in a daze at the kitchen table. Her evening gown was torn and caked in mud. She looked at Julian, who was wiping a cut on his forehead, his face still expressionless. You saw me, Julian. Mark knows I'm here. Nothing is a secret anymore, Elena said, her voice shaking. Yeah, but now he also knows you aren't alone. Julian sat down across from her, his gaze holding a hint of warmth for the first time. And more importantly, when you looked into his eyes just now, what did you see? Elena thought for a moment, then softly replied, fear. He isn't afraid of me exposing him. He's afraid because he realized Savannah isn't as easy to swallow as he thought. Damn straight, Julian nodded. He made the biggest mistake a hunter can make, showing his true face to the prey. Mark's arrogance is the biggest legal loophole we have. Tomorrow we start tearing apart the Southern Cross file I managed to grab from their car during the chase. He placed a dust-covered blue folder on the table. Elena opened it, her eyes lighting up as she saw the names of the anonymous shareholders. Karma wasn't some distant fate. It was a set of numbers carelessly recorded by men who thought they were above the law. That night, while Mark fumed, trying to cover his tracks at the local police station, back at Martha's Inn, two battered souls sat side by side, plotting a counterstrike with the sharpest weapon of all, the truth. The yellowed lights in the Willow kitchen flickered as the early season storm lashed the window panes with violent whips of rain. Julian sat motionless in his chair, letting Elena bandage the wound on his arm, his eyes locked onto the zoning map she had just spread across the table. Southern Cross doesn't just want the land, Julian, Elena whispered, her voice hardening. They need this harbor as a money-laundering hub for the dirty cash flowing down from Chicago. Mark picked Savannah because the land registry system here still has loopholes dating back to the colonial era. If we can find the original physical copies of the foreclosure documents, we'll have proof they forged the landowner's signatures, including Sarah's. Julian tightened his fist. I know where they're keeping the hard copies. The Regency West Hotel. It's not just a venue for the gala, the penthouse is Southern Cross's temporary HQ in Savannah. But the security up there is a fortress. Then we're going to turn that fortress into a stage, Elena replied. a spark of resolve in her eyes. The plan was forged in the dead of night. On Saturday evening, Savannah donned a mask of hollow glamour for the Future of the South gala. Elena, draped in an evening gown borrowed from Martha, stepped into the main lobby as Old Man Miller's guest. Beneath her lace mask, she watched Mark standing on the dais, radiant and full of himself. Meanwhile, Julian, disguised in a maintenance uniform, moved through the technical crossbases. Through a micro earpiece, he coordinated the strike. Power goes dark in 5 seconds. Elena, you got 60 seconds to slip into the service elevator. Click. The entire hotel plunged into pitch black. Elena bolted. In the penthouse office, she located a wall safe hidden behind a landscape painting. Using professional techniques paired with Julian's radio guidance, Elena cracked the safe. Inside wasn't just paperwork, but a digital recording. Mark's voice ordering his goons to handle Sarah if she refused to sign a bogus will. "I've got it, Julian," Elena gasped. But at that exact moment, the lights hummed back to life. The office door swung wide. Mark stood there, the handgun in his grip as cold as the look in his eyes. "I knew you could never sit tight, Elena," Mark sneered. "You always wanted to play the hero, but Savannah doesn't need a hero. It needs capital, and I'm the one bringing the checkbook." "You're only bringing rot, Mark," Elena said, holding up her phone, which was already broadcasting a live stream. "You've got over 10,000 viewers right now. Your colleagues in Chicago and the FBI field office I've got on a patch through." Mark's face drained of color. He started to squeeze the trigger just as a dark figure lunged from the balcony. Julian, with a spectacular flying tackle, kicked the gun from Mark's hand. The two men crashed into a brutal slugfest. Julian poured 5 years of pent-up bitterness into every strike, pinning Mark against the wall. "Stop, Julian. Don't let him turn you into a killer," Elena screamed. The sirens of the U.S. Marshals wailed beneath the building. Julian froze, his fist hovering inches from Mark's nose. He jerked his chin, looking down at his trembling enemy, with absolute disdain. "You aren't worth another stint in the big house," Julian said coldly. The tactical team swarmed in. Mark and the corrupt officials were cuffed and stuffed on the spot. In the chaos, Elena retrieved the original file and recording the final key to putting Mark behind bars and clearing Sarah's name. Returning to the Willow as dawn approached, Elena and Julian stood on the porch, watching the last of the police cruisers pull away. The inn seemed to stand taller and firmer under the fading starlight. "It's finally over, isn't it?" Elena asked, leaning her head against Julian's shoulder. "No, Elena." Julian took her hand, a firm grip that signaled a new beginning. "This is just when we start rebuilding what was torn down. Savannah's going to be a whole different city tomorrow." As the federal vehicles faded into the shadows of the oak groves, Julian remained standing, his hands once used only for hammers and chisels, now gripping the wooden railings so hard his knuckles showed white under the dying moon. Elena lightly touched his arm. The chill from her mud-stained evening gown seeped into his skin, a stark reminder that the nightmare they had just survived was a brutal reality they had conquered together. "We need to get Mrs. Martha inside," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse but carrying a newfound strength. "And we have to get ready. Tomorrow, all of Savannah is going to wake up to a truth they aren't prepared to face." In the ensuing hours of that morning, the inn became a makeshift command center. Old Man Miller arrived at 4 a.m., breathless and with his silver hair disheveled, but his eyes were electric behind his thick frames. He slammed a fresh stack of legal documents onto the kitchen table. Tax law loopholes he'd been quietly documenting for years, waiting for someone with Elena's guts to pull the trigger on them. "This is the nail in the coffin, Elena," Miller said, his hand trembling as he pointed to rows of figures. "Mark didn't just forge signatures for land. He used state relief loans as financial leverage for Southern Cross. That's federal-level embezzlement of public funds." Elena didn't sleep. She sat at the wooden table Julian had built, eyes glued to the laptop screen, fingers flying as she drafted an emergency petition to the Georgia Supreme Court. Every line she wrote now carried the weight of a formal sentence, sharpened by her betrayal in Chicago and fueled by Savannah's resilience. Julian quietly headed out to the backyard. He began clearing the wreckage of the scaffolding, the remnants of last night's chase and gunfire. With every sweep of the broom, every piece of lumber stacked neatly back in place, it felt like he was reclaiming his stolen honor bit by bit. He realized that even with Mark in cuffs, this war wouldn't truly be over until people like Sarah, victims, caught in the gears of the machine, were found. I'm going after her, Julian said, stepping back into the kitchen where Elena was on her third cup of coffee. Elena looked up. You got a lead? One of Mark's goons talked last night. Mentioned an abandoned farmstead in North Chatham County. That's where they keep their delinquent debts. Sarah's likely there. Julian checked his sidearm, fully loaded, but this time he didn't hide it with a sense of shame. He carried it with the authority of a man protecting what's right. I'm coming with you, Elena said, standing up and snapping her laptop shut. No, Elena. You need to stay here with Miller. The feds will be back in an hour. You're the only one who can walk them through these files in a way they can hand wave away. Use the law as your weapon. I'll use the strength of a man with nothing left to lose. Julian pulled out just as the sun broke over the river. Savannah woke up to a strange atmosphere. Federal sirens wailed along the main drags, and raids on Southern Cross headquarters played out live under the glare of news cameras. The city's residents spilled into the streets, watching the men who once looked down on them being perp-walked to vehicles in total disgrace. At the Willow, Elena received the FBI agents with a completely different energy. She was no longer a disgraced legal flunky. She was the gatekeeper of the entire case. She guided them through Mark's financial maze, pinpointing how he'd greased the palms of local officials and used the Future of the South brand to mask a black hole of corruption. Mid-meeting, Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Julian. Found her. She's okay. On our way back. An hour later, Julian's Jeep swung into the yard. Sarah stepped out, gaunt and her clothes filthy, but her eyes still held the sharp wit of a long-time notary. She threw her arms around Elena, tears finally breaking loose after days of being kept in the dark. I got it, Elena, Sarah sobbed, pulling a small memory card from the lining of her jacket. The original recordings of the calls between Mark and the city council. They thought I destroyed it, but I managed to tuck it away. With that memory card, the portrait of Mark Vance's crimes was complete. No more loopholes for the defense. No more shadow players left to protect him. 6 weeks later, the trial of Mark Vance and the Southern Cross Group took place in downtown Atlanta to ensure an impartial jury. Elena Vance walked into the courtroom in a jet-black legal robe, her license to practice law restored in a historic decision by the Bar Association. She wasn't sitting in the gallery. She stood at the special prosecutor's podium by invitation of the Department of Justice. Looking Mark dead in the eye, a man now haggard and completely broken in the defendant's chair, Elena felt no urge for revenge. She only felt a profound sense of peace. Your Honor, Elena's voice rang out, commanding the solemn room. The law is not a tool for the powerful to seize control. It is the final bulkhead protecting people like the residents of the Savannah Harbor, people like Sarah, and people like Julian Thorne. The truth doesn't belong to the man with the deepest pockets. It belongs to the one with the courage to defend it. After the trial concluded with a life sentence for Mark, Elena returned to Savannah. The city remained standing, ancient under the golden streetlights, but the air felt significantly lighter. She found Julian on the balcony of their new office, the small house, where he had personally restored every grain of wood. He didn't say a word, just handed her a new key engraved with her name, Vance and Thorne Law Offices. Did you finish the bookshelves? Elena asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. Done. And I fixed the window too. This time, it's gonna let the morning light in without any ghosts hanging around. Julian smiled.